club takes pleasure in attracting a stellar list of speakers that address today's most relevant issues. The club's place as a refuge for rich discussion and networking has never wavered after 123 seasons.
We are dedicated to encouraging debate on the issues that matter to this city, this province, and this country.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Anita McCuitt, and I'm president of the Canadian Club Toronto and national leader for TMT and consumer markets for PwC Canada. Today, we are connected virtually. We acknowledge that we are on the territory of many Indigenous peoples over the centuries, most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. We at Canadian Club Toronto recognize that at face level, land acknowledgements are not enough. We cannot change our past, but we must confront it, accept the truth, and do better in our present and future. Last week, the Tk'emlúps-Te First Nations shared that as many as 215 children's bodies were found near the site of a residential school in Kamloops, BC. Canadian Club Toronto acknowledges the sadness and anger that we're feeling upon learning of this tragedy, and especially the trauma that's been stirred for those whose lives have been personally impacted by the residential school system. We recognize through the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and others that there is much more that we need to learn about our shared past and to make right the injustices. The Canadian Club Toronto, as Canada's longest standing podium of record, will discuss more of this shared past and future in our coming seasons. Before we hear from our speakers today, here's some information about how you can participate with us. The click here to switch stream button helps if you find that your internet is slow. The audio quality should stay strong, but the video quality may decrease a bit. Once you click the questions tab, you are free to enter your questions and they will go straight to our moderator. And we do want your questions today, so keep them coming. And now to the main event. All eyes are on social responsibility as the business community responds to the pandemic's economic impacts. Canadian businesses, large and small, have stepped up to support each other and their communities during the pandemic. Today, we're joined by Guy Cormier, Jenn Harper, and Kayla Isabelle for a discussion on doing good through business and supporting their communities and other entrepreneurs along the way. Thanks to the generous sponsorship of EY, today's conversation is free of charge. We're grateful for your support of today's discussion. One of the club's traditions that has not changed in this virtual world is a toast that we make to our country. So if you have a drink nearby, please join me in a toast to Canada. To Canada. Now, I'd like to turn the podium over to Paul Batista, Managing Partner and Financial Services Industry Leader for EY Canada, to introduce today's speakers.
Thank you, Anita. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce everyone to this afternoon's distinguished panel, beginning with Mr. Guy Cormier, President and CEO of Desjardins Group. Guy was 26 years old when he joined the world of cooperatives and started working at Desjardins Group. He became the President and CEO in 2016 and is completely transforming the organization with his member and client-focused vision. He is a leader who puts innovation, people, and communities first. And these values are also key to his goal to make Desjardins every Canadian's #1 choice. His values are also why he created the Good Spark Fund to support different community projects. He is also actively involved in engaging youth. He became the first sponsor of Academos, an organization that helps young people reach their full potential by connecting them with professionals in the workforce. He also supports prosperity, sustainable economic development, and building a more open and inclusive society. Our second panelist is Kayla Isabelle, the CEO of Startup Canada. Kayla Isabelle is the CEO of Startup Canada, the national rallying community supporting and giving a voice to Canada's 3.5 million entrepreneurs. Kayla has dedicated her career to supporting entrepreneurs both in Canada and internationally. An advocate for women in leadership, Kayla is also the host of the Startup Women's Podcast, which is focused on providing resources to women entrepreneurs across Canada. Kayla is also the board chair of the Innovators and Entrepreneurs Foundation, president of the International Association of Business Communicators, Ottawa chapter, and a former board member of the Canadian Public Relations Society. With a passion for mentorship, Kayla runs the IABC Members Connect Mentorship Program, is a Carleton University Network Mentor, and Ottawa Community Immigrant Services Organization Career Mentor. Kayla has also worked as a coach at the World Skills Employment Center for Newcomers to Canada and as a volunteer with the Darkness into Light Suicide Prevention Initiative. Our third panelist is Jenn Harper, founder and CEO of Cheekbone Beauty Cosmetics Inc. An award-winning social entrepreneur, Jenn Harper is the founder and CEO of Cheekbone Beauty Cosmetics Inc., a digitally native, direct-to-consumer brand with a mission to help Indigenous youth see themselves in a beauty brand. Cheekbone Beauty uses the concept of a circular economy in its brand ethos and in developing its latest line of products, and in doing so, has created an entirely new segment within the beauty industry, sustainable, socially conscious beauty. Jenn has been making a name for herself in the beauty industry for a number of years, but has been gaining popularity quickly after Cheekbone Beauty was featured on the hit CBC show Dragon's Den. In addition to Cheekbone's mission of helping Indigenous youth see themselves in a beauty brand, she strives to educate as many people as possible about the residential school system and the effects it has had on family and friends through decades of generational trauma. She speaks regularly to university, college, and high school students about social entrepreneurship, empathy, and the history of her First Nations family. She's also been invited to speak to various entrepreneur groups, women in business associations, Apple Canada, and First Nation organizations across the country. Our last and final panelist is David Skok, founder and editor-in-chief of The Logic. Before founding The Logic in 2018, where he serves as editor-in-chief, David Skok was the associate editor and head of editorial strategy at the Toronto Star. He's also served as the managing editor and vice president of digital for the Boston Globe and as co-creator and director of digital for Global News. David is a leading thinker on digital transformation who co-published a seminal paper on disruption in the news industry with the legendary Harvard Business School professor Clayton M. Christensen. David sits on the advisory board for the Nieman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard University and has served as a juror for the Pulitzer Prizes in Journalism. With a heartfelt Canadian Club welcome to all of our panelists, I will now turn over the virtual podium to Mr. Guy Cormier. Guy.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, and hello, everyone, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really honored to be speaking with you today, and thank you to the Canadian Club for inviting me. 2020 marked a pivotal moment for Desjardins. As it turned out, our 120th anniversary was a mere footnote in a year unlike any other. The pandemic reminded us that the principles Desjardins was founded on, shared responsibility, commitment to the community, and cooperative growth, are more relevant than ever. The pandemic has taken a huge toll and the global economy has been hit hard. But as the vaccine rollout picks up speed across the country, Canadians can see we're on the road to healing socially and economically. A crisis can be a catalyst for change. And recovery doesn't have to mean going back the way things were before. To me, it means moving forward, informed by the lessons we have learned. After 40 years, after 40 years of unbridled capitalism, our economic system had already reached a crossroads before the pandemic hit. Capitalism has excelled at putting human ingenuity to work in pursuit of profit. It's a system that has had a massive impact on global poverty. According to the World Bank, it has helped more than 1 billion people live themselves out of extreme poverty over the last 30 years. But it has also caused significant collateral damage. Think about climate change, economic inequality, or the eroding trust in institutions around the world. And the pandemic has highlighted the importance of buying local and reducing waste. We really need to shift away from the unsustainable linear economic model where we extract, transform, use, and throw away. We need an economy that is circular, where waste can become raw materials. Our planet and our economy need this. We really need to redefine our economic system so that it takes in consideration the best interest of future generations and local economy. Today, they are left out of the capitalist equation. At Desjardins, we have taken a hard look at how we can help spread this new type of capitalism. And one way is to support entrepreneurs who share a vision of doing good through business. Canada has a vibrant startup community and social entrepreneurship is on the rise, but it needs support to grow and to thrive. Small businesses and entrepreneurs play a vital role in the economic health and sustainability of our communities. And supporting those communities is at the heart of what Desjardins does as a financial cooperative. In fact, throughout the pandemic, we have continued to lived out our values. In addition to the relief measures we continue to provide, we were helping local families and businesses. Whether it's our $250 million Good Spark Fund that supports projects aimed at socioeconomic development, or the $10 million Momentum Fund to stimulate local business development to help accelerate growth and create quality jobs, or how we invested $1 million to support 75 local businesses across Canada through our small business grants program only last year. We are standing shoulder to shoulder with our members, our clients, and our communities. And this is important. So for businesses, being responsible and being invested in our communities is no longer a matter of managing our public image. More than ever, being invested in our community, in our members, in our clients, and in our employees will enable us to have viable businesses on the other side of this pandemic. Businesses can and must play a role in our socioeconomic development if we want a faster recovery and a better and stronger economy. And as I mentioned previously, a crisis can be a catalyst for change. I've said it a lot over the past year. We have an opportunity, a real opportunity, to hit the reset button. There is no vaccine for climate change, for racial discrimination, for gender inequality, or for the other major challenges our society faces. We have an opportunity to make some changes to how we operate and how we impact the environment. changes to how we invest our money responsibly, and changes to how we support our communities. At Desjardins, we're always working to improve the well-being of our communities. Why? Well, because our focus is on future generations, not necessarily next quarter's results. Our cooperative values are rooted in the unwavering belief that economic development should drive social progress. They go hand in hand. The one makes the other possible. Social responsibility is front and center the business community response to the economic impacts of the pandemic. For Canada, it has never been more crucial that development be responsible and equitable, and that growth be inclusive and shared. And balancing economic and social progress is hard. And the viability of our economic system depends on businesses taking a larger socioeconomic role. This is easier said than done in an environment where businesses are fighting just to keep their people working and their lights on right now. To ensure shared prosperity, we really need to rethink capitalism. Social entrepreneurs are working really hard to change how we do business. Let's really support them the best way we can. Because now, more than ever, companies that prioritize their communities will be more sustainable, more resilient, and more capable of achieving long-term growth. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Guy. Good afternoon, everybody. I am David Skok, the founder, entrepreneur of The Logic, publication focused on Canada's transformation from a resource economy to a knowledge-based economy. And really, some of these issues that Guy has spoken about are some that we take to heart, both in what we cover and in how we choose to run our business. I'm going to give Guy a second to catch his breath, maybe to grab a glass of water. And first, welcome Jenn and Kayla. Jenn, if I could start with you, when you hear Guy's remarks, first, if you could tell us a little bit more about Cheekbone, and congratulations on the news this week with Sephora. Maybe you can tell us about that as well. But how do you wrestle with the social purpose of Cheekbone versus that pursuit of profits and that constant tension that we're all, wrestling with every day?
Sure. So if I went back to when I started the company, our sole purpose was to provide a platform where Indigenous youth felt represented. I came to this with no experience in the beauty industry. So hindsight, I might not have chosen this now, what I know now. But it literally, it's a really crazy, insane story, but had a dream. Like, I had a career in the food industry for many, many years, and then had this dream about Native little girls covered in lip gloss. I jump out of bed that night, literally grabbed my laptop and started writing out what is now, the beginnings of our business plan. But the whole concept was, if I was going to do this, it was actually going to be about giving back to our community, and how could I create something that existed to support my people, Indigenous people. And I really had no idea what we were building, to be perfectly honest, at the time, but I knew that give back and that social aspect was the reason the business was going to exist. The beauty industry doesn't need another beauty brand. It really doesn't. There's far too many. So if we're going to be here, we're going to be here to do good and to give back.
And if I may give you a plug there, just tell us a little bit about the Sephora deal that happened this week.
Yeah, so we've been working on Sephora for a really long time. Our goal has always been reach meaning Indigenous people worldwide are 370 million from continent to continent. And we wanted to exist as a brand that was there for our kids. And our dream partnership was always Sephora, because they are the largest beauty retailer in the world. And we launch in Sephora.ca coming this September.
Well, congratulations. Kayla, you kind of have this wonderful perch where you get to see a whole bunch of companies and how they're all adapting. And I'm curious if you're seeing more companies like Jenn's. Is this a trend? Or, are more entrepreneurs coming in and saying, I want to do something that is helping the community, or has it always been this way? I get that. That's something I always wonder is are we just, rebranding something that's always been the whole reason why a lot of people get into entrepreneurship?
That's such a great question, David. And thank you again to the Canadian Club for having me here today. I think if we look at the foundations, the Startup Canada's network is very early stage, looking at ideation-based companies, those that are at the very beginning of their entrepreneurship journey. So we have some really interesting data on where their intentions are at the beginning of building their business, similar to what Jenn was just describing, when she first had that dream. And in our annual census, we have been asking, are entrepreneurs looking to build social enterprises or connecting back to some type of sustainable development goal? And what we've seen year over year is an increase in that interest. But notably in 2020, during the pandemic, we actually saw a 20% increase from last year in organizations that were looking to align to a UN Sustainable Development Goal. So this year, we had 86% of the Startup Canada community interested in aligning to an SDG, so one of those 17 goals. Last year, it was at 66%. So we've seen 20% growth even during a global pandemic. But before that, far fewer organizations were thinking about aligning to an SDG, but they were interested in trying to tackle some type of problem. So we are seeing this increase year over year, but it is astonishing, to be honest, to see across every industry, not just those that are in the nonprofit or charity space or looking to build a business that is 100% to do good. We're seeing for-profit enterprises looking at aligning to an SDG as either part of their business or part of their core mandate. So it's definitely encouraging to see that appetite. How do we now equip entrepreneurs with what they need to then scale those businesses, scale the impact, and support, additional, opportunities that come with that type of space?
Well, we're going to get into that in a few minutes, because I really do want to get into the nitty gritty of what it takes to start a business and how some of the stuff, that Guy talked about so eloquently at the top, how it translates into the day-to-day functioning of incorporating a business and moving on. And on that note, Guy, I think it's worthwhile, and forgive me for this, but if you could talk a little bit about Desjardins' cooperative model, because I'm not sure if most people actually know what a cooperative means in its most tactical form, and how that then translates and trickles through the business.
Well, actually, our founder, Alphonse Desjardins, in 1900, was looking at the society, and it was really difficult for French Canadian and for some people in Quebec to have access to credit, because some other competitors weren't necessarily there in the market. So he read a lot in Europe, in UK, and there was this cooperative model where people were launching their own credit union, their own co-op, and to give financial services to them. So savings, financial literacy, borrowing money. So it's really started in Lévis as one really small financial institution with coins and dollars at that time. And now it's a $370 billion assets financial institution. But what was important is, as a co-op, the values are really strong, and there's a democratic process. So people, our members, can be elected on the board of directors of each of our cases. They have a voice. There's an annual assembly where the members, our clients, are allowed to come, and they can express their satisfaction or their needs. And at the end of the day, these values are really, really strong. So over the last 120 years, for us, yes, we're making profit. We're making more than $2.5 billion per year as net profit. So we're there to make money. Also, it will give us more services to our members. But at the end of the day, the meaning is how we enrich the lives of people in communities. And during the pandemic, our values were so strong that it was really easy for us to take really quick decisions for relief measures, reimbursement of insurance, an emergency loan of $3,000 for our members who were in need, waiting for some government's support. So that's the kind of mindset that we are in right now as a co-op. And it's a business model that I see that more and more entrepreneurs are looking at, because the company is owned by our members, our clients, and it's model.
Okay, so let's talk about that legal entity thing. And Kayla, maybe I'll come to you for this. I want to start a business. First thing I do is go to the Government of Canada website and I incorporate, come up with a name, try to find a domain name that costs too much money and spends way too much time, sleepless nights trying to think about my name of my company and the URL. What do I do next? B Corp, co-op. What are the barriers? It's one thing to incorporate your business and say you want to be a for-profit company. When you start to institutionalize some of these things in your governance, do people know what to do? And I know you're providing help for them. How much of a barrier is that next phase in starting a business?
So your first step is to come to Startup Canada. So the first step, it is incredibly overwhelming, to be honest, for any entrepreneur. It is a huge feat to delve into entrepreneurship, to put everything on the line, to start a business, even outside of a global pandemic, is an incredibly challenging thing to do. So step one, kudos for making that leap. But that is one of the biggest challenges that I see within the entrepreneurship ecosystem. There are so many fragmented resources that exist that are fantastic. We have, federally supported institutions, we have provincial spaces, we have small municipal supports, we have accelerators, incubators, so many different support entities. But as an entrepreneur, understanding what that first step is, post-incorporation or even pre-incorporation, what is federal incorporation versus provincial? Understanding these key questions, there's not a centralized space to understand where you need to be in your entrepreneurship journey and where to tap into with those resources. So as a collective and as entrepreneur support organizations, big and small, I think in terms of economic recovery, there's a really unique opportunity that we have to come together and to streamline this process, because there are so many barriers that you are overcoming as an entrepreneur. And if you are a woman, if you are from a racialized community, if you are in any type of marginalized community, those barriers are tenfold. So how can we support at least clarifying what that journey is as a collective, so that entrepreneurs don't have to do that thinking, because building their business is hard enough. So I think this is actually a really unique moment, social enterprise or beyond, to streamline the supports that we can offer entrepreneurs so that they can ask these questions in a more efficient way, and they're not wasting their time Googling their way through their business, as so many entrepreneurs do.
Jen, naturally, the next part of that, incorporating your business, is then getting financing, if that's a path that you want to take. How has that process and journey been for you? And have you found that, it's wonderful, Mr. Cormier standing up and saying this stuff, but when you go to the banks, do you find that there is what is the expectation on margins, I guess, is maybe the more direct question. And how does that balance with, look, we're doing a social impact business here. Oh, yes, we want to make money. But is it easy to get that line of credit if you need it when, ultimately they're still looking at your balance sheet, or are they only looking at your balance sheet?
Yeah, so certainly a big question. And I think there's different levels of entrepreneurship, or at what phase of your business you're in, and where you would go and ask for money. I think early on, entrepreneurs need to understand that maybe the bank is not necessarily the first place that one would go. You need to really prove that your business is viable and feasible. So I think for us, we took sort of that let's test the market approach. And we were gratefully did that for 3 years, and then finally had a social impact investment fund invest in our business, which was amazing because our values aligned very, very well. And they're Indigenous based, and they're from Vancouver, Canada, and it's called Raven Capital. And then as you're growing and scaling your business, I think that's when your bank becomes your partner. And then you can ask them for lines of credit at certain points as you're growing, and have vendor agreements and purchase orders from big organizations like Sephora. I know banks love to help entrepreneurs that have those things in their arsenal.
Very much so. And just coming back to the customers, Jen, what kind of messaging worked for you? Obviously the product, like we always say at The Logic, our journalism has to be 10 times better than everybody else's. So, you have to be better than the incumbents if you're gonna do well. But there's that other element of doing good by supporting this product. What kind of messaging has resonated with your customers?
Yeah, so, we just actually did a quick little poll this weekend, and from over 1,000 comments when I asked our community, and that's what we call our customers, what they loved about Cheekbone Beauty. Number one, it was Indigenous women owned. And secondly, was our sustainability mission and goals and how transparent we were about that process. So, and from the beginning, we realized that this unique sort of what separated us from what other beauty brands had to offer was this whole entire new lens of being Indigenous owned. And so what that means is we're really sharing stories from how we were growing up and how we were raised, that protecting the next generations, that's innately in a lot of Indigenous groups. And much as Mr. Cormier was talking about, that's important to think about. It's not, this quick buck operation. We're thinking about the future, and that is something that is certainly innately Indigenous from our communities, and how what we do today impacts the next generations when it comes to environmental focus and impact. And so I think that us connecting with a broad audience, we've done the research, we have about 1/3 Indigenous customers, so most of our customers are actually non-Indigenous. And what we've learned from them is that they really love seeing the world through an Indigenous lens, and that they love supporting brands that are doing good.
Mr. Cormier, I am curious, your fiduciary duty to your, when you have a governance structure and you have to worry about your own board and what their expectations are and your investors. It's great, $250 million to boost socioeconomic through the Good Spark Fund. These are wonderful things, the Small Business Grant Program, the Momentum Fund. Is it something that is on the side of the desk of Desjardins? I mean, how do you make sure that you can both support these businesses while at the same time getting the returns needed to get to record growth? Well,
like I said, we have to rethink the way we want to do business, and we want to work with local communities and smaller businesses. It's not only a question of launching funds and spreading money in the society. It's not only that, it's also the way you manage your company. As an example, we decide that the suppliers we want to work with will be from Canada, will be from Quebec, will be from Ontario. We decide that we won't transfer our call center around the globe. We decide that it was more important to keep our employees here in Canada and to support communities and society. We decide when we hire employees to see if it's possible to hire people that are close to the communities that our branches or our insurance companies are in. So I think it's important when we're discussing about rethinking capitalism and the way we manage our companies, not only to think that, okay, we'll make profit, we'll pay taxes, and our governments will take care of the social issues in our country. I think we have to rethink the fact that while we're building or creating values in our companies, during the process of creating values, profit, how can we take decisions that will support smaller businesses, that will support local communities, that will support our economies? Sometimes it could be more expensive. Yes, it's true. Our call center are in Montreal, are in Three Rivers, are in Gaspé, are in Sherbrooke. Could it be less expensive in other countries? Yes, probably. We will make more profit. But at the end of the day, if our communities are not strong, if they don't buy locally, what's the meaning of? And I think the pandemic showed us really clearly how important it is to have, a chain where we're all interconnected, because when there's a link or a big gap, well, we have issues. So I think it's a way also to support local entrepreneurship.
And Guy, 120 years, Desjardins is been around the block. It's naturally a long-term thinking company. Paul is here from EY, proudly putting this on, along with Anita, president of the Canadian Club, who's with PwC. What are the structural, the reason why I bring up the accounting firms is, what are the structural changes that need to happen in order to do an audit, for example, that's not just based entirely on, profit and loss statements, but that takes into account some of these things you're talking about? Is there more that can be done structurally to get these changes into measuring impact? I mean, the Sustainable Finance Group certainly is thinking about this at the federal level, but what about at the company level?
Well, I think we're heading in the right direction. Now there's a lot of discussions. You have the accounting side that is looking at what we should do. We have many ONGs and organizations who are like, okay, regarding climate change, ESG. I think we are in the middle of a very important discussion in this country and around the globe. And I'm really positive that in the next few years, we will really have strong measures, KPI, and a transparency regarding many of our ESG criteria. And the pressure will come not only from investors, but what I see in the last year and a half and 2-3 years is pressure from our employees. People want to work for a company that has a purpose. I'm amazed to see how many employees we hired in the last 12 months. And one of the reasons is, well, we want to work for a company that has a purpose, and we look at Desjardins, what we have accomplished in this country over the last few years. So I'm really optimistic that there is a connection now between many players who wants to discuss and have a baseline. Now the issue is that we have different baseline. We have different ways of analyzing. Is it a question of final impact, or are we integrating the transition process in it? So there's many questions of what kind of KPI or indicators or reports we should accomplish together. But I'm really, really optimistic. Just Desjardins, for the last 5-10 years, we have annually a report about how much things we have accomplished on the ESG side and the impact of the economy. But now we must try to build something that is quite the same. And if you're a small company, it's sure that you don't have the same capacity as a 49,000 employees Desjardins company in this country. But at least you start by what you can start, and year after year, we are better than we were 5 years ago, and we will be better as an organization in 5 years. I'm totally convinced.
Kayla, Jen, did either of you want to get in on that or add any comments in terms of the structural changes from even just an auditing perspective that may need to happen?
I think one note around impact measurement, to Guy's point, this is hard. Impact measurement is not as easy as, success means one indicator, and we are going to focus on that one key KPI that we're all striving towards. And the investment readiness program through ESDC and through the federal government is doing a lot of work around this to then trickle down into other support organizations. So using entities like NACA, like Community Foundations of Canada, like Startup Canada, other nimble organizations that can listen to entrepreneurs on the other side and ask, what does success look like to you in terms of shared prosperity or social alignment or how you're building your business? And how can we also make sure that that is consultative, so it's not just top down from the funders or from the federal government or provincial governments? So that influence piece from the grassroots entrepreneurship level is also so important in those conversations, that we don't become too prescriptive in what these lofty goals are, and that we're sort of receiving that feedback on the other end.
Certainly. Jen, did you want to add anything to that?
Just to include that along the same lines as, we love data, super important. It helps us make really good decisions. But it's also important to hear the stories. And I think that that's what Kayla was really touching on, that, every entrepreneur has a story, the reason why they're doing the thing that they're doing. And so we even know in terms of looking for finance, that there's no section on your applications that asks for your story. However, when you build a great relationship with your banker, it's interesting. When I recently had a conversation with mine, he said, I already know your story. So that was huge for me. I was like, that is amazing that you even said that, because so many other times people aren't interested in that part. They just want the data.
It's a great point. Speaking of data, The Logic last week did a survey where we ask our subscribers questions every month, and they come back with some insights. And I thought this was worth sharing because it was a little bit surprising to me around human capital. It found that companies should take a public stance and not stay silent on discussions about social or political issues, which Guy, you were mentioning as well. 56% of subscribers agreed that companies should weigh in. 38% said somewhat agreed, and 18% strongly agreed. Only 32% disagreed. And the reason this came up was Shopify CEO Toby Lütke told managers recently that at the e-commerce company, they cannot solve every societal problem. They must focus on the core business objectives and avoid endless Slack trolling, victimhood thinking, us versus them divisiveness, and zero-sum thinking. Toby's words, not mine. Other companies that have done similar things, Coinbase, Basecamp, and Facebook and Google have also discouraged or restricted internal social and political discussions. I bring this all up, and perhaps I should go around the horn with this one and give everybody a chance to respond. Because as we empower employees, as we say, your voice matters and we are listening to you, you also open yourselves up to more criticism from your employees. There are risks there as well as rewards. And I'm curious how you're all managing that. And full disclosure, I'm managing it too. How far in front of things do you really want to get at the risk of ultimately harming yourself and your business? Maybe Jenn, I'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, such an interesting topic. And as leaders, it's something that I think we think about a lot. But, one thing that we discussed this week as a company is it's interesting how the more inclusive we become, the greater the divide. And so how do you not allow that to happen when you're leading companies? Still unanswered, but I think it's important that leaders definitely listen and listen and really, unconscious bias is human, and so it's really hard for leaders to probably remove themselves from a lot of the situations or topics regarding anything social. But I think it's important that you stop to take the time and listen.
Jenn, to you.
Or up to Kayla.
Oh, sorry, to Kayla, sorry.
No worries. Yeah, completely agree with Jenn there. And I think it just comes down to authenticity. At the end of the day, it has been such a demanding last couple of years for leaders, in addition to COVID, with the various movements happening, with the tough conversations that we've had to have with our teams across so many different divides and around so many different topics. So I think showing up authentically and acknowledging areas that we may not be doing well at is very important. And I think my team personally has really resonated with my leadership journey, learning on the go and having to understand Startup Canada's role in these various challenges, how our partners can play a role to help us through this journey, but ensuring that however we show up publicly is authentic and appropriate. That, why are we posting a black tile on Instagram? Or why are we showing up with a message of support for something? What is the deeper intention there? Because it does not pass the sniff test anymore to just verbally speak to these different topics. You have to really understand where you sit in these very challenging conversations and in these very important topics, but not just giving lip service to it. How do you both talk the talk and walk the walk authentically? Because to Guy's point, it's not enough anymore, and your employees will not stay. Your employees will not potentially come to you as an employer of choice, and it erodes your brand overall. So I think that authenticity piece is huge, but understanding where you play in the overall ecosystem and what your position is also very important.
Guy, 40,000 employees at Desjardins.
Well, yeah. 49,000 employees.
49,000.
This is a very good question, David, honestly. First, I think at least it's important to realize that as a co-op, we're there for our members and our clients. 75 million clients across this country. One of their first expectation is at least that we offer them insurance, wealth management, commercial loans, a personal loan. We're there for them. That's the main purpose of why our founder decided to found Desjardins. So at least we always have to remind that. But mainly in Quebec, but more and more across the country, from my perspective, Desjardins has to be a socioeconomic leader in this society. And I totally agree with Kayla. We can't say yes to everything and try to be 10 on 10 on everything. You must decide what it's really important as an organization, what it's connect to your purpose, and be so real and authentic. And don't try to say something and don't act properly in the months and the weeks and the years after, because your employees, your clients, your members will look at you and say, you know what, now we don't trust you no more for the other decision you will take. So that's why it's important for us. And it's a fine line, seriously, because with 49,000 employees, I understand so well that many of our employees have their own purpose, have a goal in life, have some ideas, some they want to discuss different topics, and we really appreciate to have these kind of discussion. Really, a lot of meetings regarding racial discrimination, gender parity. We really favor these kind of discussion in the organization to try to see if we can just understand, have a better understanding of these kind of issues. But it's a very good question.
I wise remarks from all three of you. By the way, for everybody watching, please continue to send in your questions. I am seeing them. I hope that I'm trying to answer them in some of the questions that I'm asking, but please keep them come in. We still have about 15 minutes left here. There seems to be a public awakening over the past few weeks, certainly on a larger scale, that Canada is not a place that has shared prosperity. What role do you three see businesses playing in moving this country forward in a way that, you know, Edelman does their annual Serve Trust Index survey, and usually it's government and media that are the ones that are held to a higher standard. But this year in particular, businesses were elevated as having a greater responsibility on trust. And so, you know, part of trust is this issue, I think, of moving Canada forward. Jen, I'll start with you. What role do you see businesses? I mean, you're living this, but how do businesses move Canada forward, not just their own bottom line?
Well, since we're a really, really small business, I always have I guess the vision and mission of the company doesn't change. And that's about, you know, being this place where our Indigenous youth feel seen and heard while we're crafting sustainable color cosmetics, which means, you know, as we grow, it would be creating jobs, creating new opportunities for all Canadians, as much as we want to employ Indigenous people and provide jobs for our community. We also want it to be a place where all people will feel comfortable and happy working, and knowing that you have potential, you have a voice as a brand, and that you can attract people to your business by the type of voice and the messaging you're using and sending out. So I think it's really important that we stay authentic to the brand that we were trying to build, which was attract all people.
Guy, you know, how do you see Desjardins Group moving Canada forward at a time like this when you know, well, I think there is a moment.
Yeah, we'll try. We really feel, like I said, that it's a moment that is really important in this country. And we'll try to do as much as we can, humbly, with our cooperative model, maybe to influence, to show to many business leaders that it's possible to have a social purpose and at the same time make more than $2 billion net profit per year. And it's possible to reconnect these two goals that for some leaders are so different, or it's not in their own purpose because they're there for their shareholders. I really feel that not only because of the pandemic, but just remember 2017, 2018, 2019, there was already a discussion regarding how much we want to make or how much we should change after 30, 40 years of capitalism. There was already this discussion. So I really feel that the pandemic has been an accelerator. And I hope that with the kind of message that we have today, the kind of influence humbly that we can have and show to people that it's possible as a cooperative or any kind of organization to really find the right balance between the shareholder interest, but at the same time, other criteria that are important in this society. And I really feel that there's more and more shareholders that are asking these kind of questions to the board of directors and the management committee of many companies, climate change impact. And they are, we have at Desjardins, we have many Desjardins Sociétaires fund, 30 funds, mutual funds, and some of them, we don't invest in fossil fuel. Some of them, we only invest in companies where there's strong female representation at the board of directors. And, many years ago, people were telling me, the returns are they the same than other returns from, normal portfolios? And now it's proven that the returns are there. So I really feel that there's a change in the mindset of the people, and there'll be more and more pressure for many stakeholders, and business leaders will have to adapt and go through this movement.
Kayla, to you.
Sure, I'll add a couple of additional thoughts, completely echo both Guy and Jenn. I think internally, practicing social responsibility with your teams. Equitable hiring, compensation, opportunities for professional development, mental health resources, and diversity and inclusion policies that are not just pieces of paper that live in your Google Drive or in a folder somewhere. Actually putting that into practice and living and breathing in your organization. I think externally, look at your supply chains, both from big corporates and small businesses. There is so much power in procurement that we can make some really dramatic changes, supporting women-owned businesses, looking at groups like We Be Canada that help diversify the supply chain, making sure more women-led businesses are there. The Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce, the CGLCC, they do some great work here as well. Looking at responsible packaging, shipping, there are a lot of different resources that we can tap into around operations and overall supply chains. And I think partnership, looking at smaller, more nimble organizations that are by and for specific audience groups. So, for example, Indigenous-led programming. At Startup Canada, we do not lead Indigenous programming because we are not an Indigenous support organization. We partner with other groups like NACA, like Aquaho Equal Source, like Powwow Pitch, and we amplify their work and their stories and their support. But we understand that those types of communities need to be led by Indigenous leaders for Indigenous leaders, and that approach for other communities that we serve. The final component is looking at different business model adaptations. And one great resource I would really recommend for businesses to look into is the Upside Foundation, which is for early stage, high growth Canadian companies to build social responsibility into the foundation of their businesses by pledging equity. And that equity goes to a charity of their choice. So there are really unique ways of embedding this into high growth companies, into small sole proprietor businesses that want to align to an SDG. There's so many different ways to cut this, but looking at supplier diversity, operations, partnerships, and business adaptation, I think are great places to start.
David, if I may just jump in, sorry, but
Absolutely.
I agree so much with Kayla. You asked me what we can do, but just working with your suppliers, not necessarily because they're not this or not that, throwing them away. No, but helping them. And that's what at Desjardins we decided for the next few years to really try to have a huge impact with our suppliers. Can we help them regarding gender diversity, climate change, environment, and not only threatening them, not that, but try to see if they can shift from one point to another, and telling them that we'll stay your clients more and more, just only because we see that there's a change in your social way that you manage your company. I totally agree with Kayla.
There is this ongoing debate about divestment. If you're looking at it from an institutional investor side, divestment versus influence from the inside. And you've seen even with the Canadian pension funds, how different pensions have approached things. CPP Investments' approach to climate is very different to teachers in their declarations of when 2030 targets will be met versus working with companies as opposed to divesting. So yeah, I think it's a really interesting debate that's going on right now. I'm going to take one. We only have a couple minutes left. one question here from a listener that I'll try to extrapolate. As a Canadian who has lived in the US for many years, it always fascinates me how different our two countries are, including our respective business communities. How would you define or explain the difference, especially with regard to the different values that seem to underlie business in each country? And I'm going to just change this a little bit and add a section, which is, Canada is competing on a global stage, and the pandemic has shown, whether it comes to supply chains or economic nationalism / protectionism, or even borders opening and closing, that we do need to be a more reliant country, self-reliant country. How does all of this at the most macro level manifest itself when we are competing for customers, jobs against China, against the United States, against Europe, all of whom have bigger budgets, bigger populations? I guess, is there a risk that this is an indulgence, to be crass about it, and that at the end of the day, global competitiveness is what really drives the country forward? And I guess I'll start with you, Guy.
Well, I think it's a very, very good question. And the answer is probably not only because of the last 4 or 5 years, but it's probably because of the last 5, 10 decades and centuries. The question is good because we're competing around the globe with other countries that have some targets or are managing sometimes ESG criteria or social issues differently than our country. So it's true that it's a real challenge. When I've discussed with entrepreneurs and business owners, they're like, yes, it's important social issues, but I have to cut my salaries, or I have to be really productive competing against. So I know it's a real challenge, but at the end of the day, I really feel that if we want to attract employees in our companies, if we want to attract people in our country, they really have to feel that we have this long-term perspective concept of building communities where we enrich the lives of the people, and they can have, yes, a strong career or build a strong company in the country, but at the same time, they can live in a country where there's peace, criminality, and all these issues, health, are there. And I see more and more people who wants to come to Canada because they feel that there's a balance between many issues, and they want to work in this country because they feel that some of our social issues we're taking care of them, maybe not perfectly, but at least we're working on them. So I feel it's another way of, it's still a challenge because we're trying to be competitive around the globe, but at least having the discussion and trying to find solutions, it's a way to.
Kayla, I'm just going to come to you to end us off here. I'm going to totally go in a different direction, if that's okay, which is you kind of are a leading indicator in dealing with all of these early stage startups and seeing where we're going. Moving forward towards the end of the pandemic, as we come out of this, I'm curious if you can give us a bit of a zeitgeisty sense of where your entrepreneurs are how they're feeling, what their cash flow situations are like, and quite frankly, if government subsidies were to run out in June, what kind of impact that may have. I recognize that may be a bit off topic, but just kind of to push us forward as we look ahead to the next 12 months.
Yeah, and a very big question that I will try to summarize in some key points.
I'm sorry.
With our remainder time, but I think entrepreneurs are exhausted. I think we all recognize that as entrepreneurs and not as entrepreneurs, that it has been a very demanding time. But I think the pandemic has really highlighted the lack of support for early stage businesses. And this is something that we continue to advocate for. And on behalf of entrepreneurs, how can we, one, build back better and making sure that early stage investment is core to Canada's economic recovery, not only supporting the businesses that are emerging now, but trying to really, to your point about the global stage, how can we position Canada as this global leader through investments with the federal government or through investments within our ecosystem? we have this great opportunity to make sure that the diversity of Canada is represented in the entrepreneurship community. We can invest heavily in those early stage businesses, provide concrete funding. This is always what entrepreneurs are asking for. Funding that is coming from various sources. But when we were talking about the States, there is this perception that Canadian investors are too conservative. And I think we get that feedback more and more, and we're seeing that in terms of economic recovery. Let's put that cash into that early stage level, build the next wave of viable businesses and scale up businesses that will come out of this pandemic. And ultimately that will serve as a key component of economic recovery. So I think we're hopeful, but this is a very unique opportunity to get this right because we haven't necessarily done so in the past.
Jen, I want to give you the final word. You not only yourself are an entrepreneur, but I suspect you talk to others. How are you feeling coming out of this pandemic?
Well, we're feeling optimistic. I mean, I think an entrepreneur is generally a little bit more delusional than the rest of the public. So we're really optimistic. And obviously at Cheekbone Beauty, we have great new partners that we're working with in this next year. So for us, super optimistic. I have heard, not everyone is feeling that way. It's been a really, really tough year for a lot of small businesses. So I think, when it comes down to it, as Canadians, how do you support Canadian small business? Just do your research when you're purchasing products and find out where exactly everything's coming from.
Great. Well, from one delusional and exhausted founder to another, thank you so much for your time, Jen, Kayla, Guy. A pleasure speaking to all three of you. And with that, I will turn it back to Anita.
Thanks, David. I'll echo that. Jen, Kayla, and Guy, thank you so much for joining us today. You've covered many important topics, but for me, it's clear that companies need to think hard about what they're actually willing to do when it comes to tackling these social issues. And if you're not willing to do anything, you should think twice about putting out a nice message of support. I think employees and customers feel that it's time for action, and that's coming through loud and clear. David, thank you for joining us again and for your expert moderation of today's conversation. It's always great to have you. Guests, we hope you'll join us for some of our upcoming events. On June 10th, we host the CEO of Sun Life, Dean Connor, for his reflections on a decade as CEO and the Canadian insurance industry on a global stage. And on June 15th, in partnership with the YMCA of Greater Toronto, we host a panel on childcare in Canada. Our expert panelists will discuss the benefits, challenges, and opportunities of Canada-wide childcare. Thank you again to EY for sponsoring today's event. Our events would not be possible without the generosity of our sponsors, so thank you once again. And thank you to our AV supplier, Van Valkenburg Communications and LiveMeeting.ca for making it possible for us to come together virtually today. Guests, thank you for joining us. Please stay healthy and stay safe.